Hello, New York Giants fans. Welcome back to the Everything New York Giants podcast with New York Giants fangirl. I'm your host, Adrianna, and today we're going to quickly recap the Giants versus Lions preseason game, and then we will preview a bit the Giants versus Texans on Saturday because we are going to see the Giants starters in action, which is very exciting. So let's go ahead and get right into it. Obviously, the star of the show and the star of the game was none other than running back Eric Gray. Not only did he have the only 2 touchdowns of the game, he looked incredible, but outside of that, he also had 46 yards receiving. He was used quite well in the receiving game and had a great game. So excited to review some of the stats. So let's keep going with the rushing attack. Then we'll get into the wide receivers, and then we'll talk about the quarterbacks because we'll get to the injuries and things like that. So the Giants had 155 rushing yards. Eric Gray accounted for 52 of them on 4 carries. Dante Miller, my guy Turbo, led the rushing attack with 12 carries for 63 yards. His longest one was 19 yards. Tyrone Tracy Jr., the rookie, who we all have very high hopes for, 5 carries for 26 yards. Drew Lock had 2 carries for 12 yards, and DeVito had 4 for 2 yards. So again, totaling 155 rushing yards. And listen, I know it's preseason, but we haven't seen a good rushing attack from this team in quite a while. So getting me a little bit excited, especially knowing that they were behind the second string offensive line. So on to the receiving. I know a lot of disappointment from all of us that Malik Neighbors didn't have any catches. Now, it's not his fault. Drew Lock, I don't know what he was looking at, but he was not looking at Neighbors, who was wide open on quite a few plays. So I think we're going to see a different Malik Neighbors and Daniel Jones this weekend, but exciting that he's out there and he's getting the reps, and, I hope to see more of him. He had an absolutely epic camp, and I'm excited to see that carry into preseason. So Eric Gray led the wide receivers with 4 receptions for 46 yards. Tyree Jackson had 2 receptions for 34 yards, and then behind that was Allen Robinson, Bellinger, Dante Miller, Bryce Ford Wheaton. All of them had under 10 yards for their receptions. So overall, 109 yards receiving. So again, a pretty good day. Listen, I know that a lot of people don't take preseason seriously and don't take it into account, but ultimately, it's a really good test for a lot of these players, especially the guys like Eric Gray, who really had an up and down camp. He is fighting for a roster spot, and when he comes out in week 1 of preseason looking the way that he did, having almost 100 yards both in rushing and receiving, gotta give the guy some credit. So it's exciting for a lot of them and from a depth perspective, and I think from a fan's perspective, what I really like and take out of it is the fact that we're finally seeing these guys in games. And whatever, you can say it's against the twos, but our second string offensive line has been abysmal for years, like Evan Neal style turnstiles across the board. So the fact that our second string offensive line was capable enough to give Drew Lock a little bit of time to get rid of the ball, same thing with Tommy DeVito, to be good at pass blocking, so our running backs could actually break through some gaps and get through the holes and make plays. These are the things that I think should make us feel a little bit better, that maybe we finally are starting to get some depth in key positions like the offensive line. So I feel better that, again, they were serviceable. I'm not asking them to be all pros as the backups, but I'm asking them to know that if they step in, we can feel semi-confident that they are actually going to do their job and get it done. So I felt pretty good about the offensive line. I feel like overall they did a pretty good job, better than I expected them to, and I'm excited to see more of them this weekend. So with that being said, let's get into the quarterbacks. Tommy DeVito was 8 of 15 for 92 yards, no touchdowns, no interceptions, and he was sacked once for 10 yards. And then Drew Lock, 4 for 10 for 17 yards, 1 interception, and he was sacked once for 4 yards. Now, Lock left the game with, I believe it was a rib oblique injury. Now, Dable said today that it's possible that Lock might be suiting up for Saturday. Is he going to play is another question. I think we're going to see Daniel Jones and Tommy DeVito. Listen, if we see Drew Lock, it's great. He obviously needs the practice, as I think we saw last week. And listen, the guy is learning a new system. He is, getting stuck with the 2s and 3s, which some days are good and some days are not so good. So I don't expect him to be perfect. I expect him to be better this week if he does play, even though he's missing some valuable time. So we'll see what happens with Drew Lock, but it is good news that he is feeling better. He's getting better every day, and again has the possibility to suit up on Saturday. So a couple other things on the injuries, and then we'll get back to the quarterbacks. Tyree Jackson, who's a tight end, has previously played quarterback. So when Drew Lock, when there's still some concern around his injury, Dable was asked, is he going to, are you going to sign a third quarterback? And, a fourth quarterback. And Dable said, no, I don't think so, because Tyree Jackson has quarterback experience. So they had him out there taking some reps. So Jackson was also dealing with some back issue. I think he was having back spasms is what they called it, but it sounds like he's going to be okay. Tyrone Tracy Jr., we completely dodged a bullet. He left practice early on Tuesday. He got carted off and his leg put in an air cast after he was untouched retrieving a punt, and he fell down screaming. And before anyone asks, it is not turf. They practice on real grass, so not a turf injury, which is good. And luckily we found out that it's a low ankle sprain. So according to Art Stapleton, a low ankle sprain, players can be out anywhere from 3 to 6 weeks. So the good news is, though, that he was back at practice today and he was running and cutting and doing things like that. So everyone keep your fingers crossed that he is back sooner than the 3 to 6 week timeline. Now, there is no need to rush him, especially when we've seen guys like Turbo and Eric Gray step up and make plays, and hopefully we'll see more of that this weekend. But I know Tyrone Tracy is a guy that we're really excited about, but we know this medical staff and they are uber conservative all of the time when it comes to injuries. So I would say don't expect to see Tracy back anytime soon, but I do think he will be back sooner than, that 6 week timeline. To me, that sounds pretty long, especially when, I thought high ankle sprain was 4 to 6 weeks, but there are a lot of reasons why I'm not a doctor. So not so sure on the timeline, but and so I'll keep our fingers crossed that he's coming back soon. So other than that, Tommy DeVito's healthy. He looks pretty good. I will say he was up and down during camp like Drew Lock was, but he really showed off in preseason and seemed to have a good day, make good decisions, threw good balls, didn't, make mistakes, no turnovers. So I'm excited to see more of DeVito, and, we'll see what happens. I feel like the Giants have to keep 3 quarterbacks on the roster. After everything that we have seen with this team and the injuries, not keeping 3 is a little questionable to me, but it will be interesting to see what they end up doing. So I think DeVito, at the very least, he ends up on the practice squad if he doesn't make the 53, but it will be interesting because, someone can poach him from the practice squad. So we'll see. Let's move over to defense quickly. Darian Beavers, who was a guy that, the Giants drafted, this front office staff drafted him in 2022, I'm fairly certain. Last year, he ended up getting cut and was a practice squad guy. This year, in the preseason game, he leads the team in tackles with 5 total, 3 solo, and 1 tackle for loss. Now, again, everything I say here, we're taking it with a grain of salt, okay? Because ultimately it's preseason. But like I said, these guys are fighting for roster spots. So let's talk about some of the guys who had really good days. Boogie Basham being one of them. And he's a guy who's had a pretty decent camp, but overall haven't really been speaking very highly of him. Most people in the media, and myself included, have been at a lot of camps and feel like he hasn't really wowed, but he's been good enough. And during the preseason game, he had 4 tackles, 2 solo, 1 sack, 1 tackle for loss, 2 pass deflections, and 1 quarterback hit. Now, someone else who was right behind him, and this was a really sad injury, was Deontay Johnson. This guy has been having an amazing camp and really pushing and fighting for a roster spot. And during that preseason game, he had 4 tackles, 2 solo, 1 sack, 2 tackles for loss, and 1 quarterback hit. So he, I believe, is an ankle, and like Dable said, it's not that serious, but, missing out on these preseason games is really valuable time for some of these younger guys. So we'll ultimately see what happens with him. I hope that he can make it back for the 3rd preseason game, but I'm not so sure that we will see him this weekend. A couple other guys on the defense who had pretty good days. Trey Hawkins had one of his better days, 3 tackles, all 3 of them solo, 1 pass deflection. Trey Herndon, who's a guy that they brought in this summer from Jacksonville, cornerback, he had 3 tackles, 2 solo, and 1 pass deflection. And then next up, we have to talk about Elijah Chapman, because last night the Giants traded, there are parts of this that are all over the place, and I apologize for that, but I'm realizing there's a lot to cover, and I'm trying to squeeze it in where it makes sense and as I remember it. So back to Elijah Chapman. The reason I want to speak highly on Elijah Chapman, he has been having a really good camp. Like, I think he's really pushing to make this 53. So what did the Giants do? Last night, they go ahead and trade away defensive tackle Jordan Phillips and a 7th round 2026 to the Cowboys. Very surprising. They made an inter-NFC East trade. Didn't see that coming. In exchange for a 6th round 2026 draft pick. Now, before anyone, I've seen some comments like, why would they ever trade him away? Have you been paying attention? Because the obvious answer is, if you are asking that, you have not been paying attention, because he has not looked good at all during camp. And Elijah Chapman has been searing way higher than what Jordan Phillips has been doing. So I say good for the Giants and Joe Shane that they at least got a draft pick out of him, because he would have been cut. I really don't think he was going to make this 53. Elijah Chapman during this game had 3 tackles, 1 solo, 1 sack, 1 tackle for loss, and 1 quarterback hit. He's a guy that everyone needs to keep your eyes on this Saturday during the Texans game. We're going to talk about that in a minute, but he's a guy who's doing really well. Do not be surprised if he makes this roster. Outside of that, Benton Whitley had 2 tackles, 1 solo, 1 sack, 1 tackle for loss, 1 pass deflection, and 2 quarterback hits. So some of these guys that are seemingly coming out of nowhere are making plays, which is again why, when people knock preseason, these are the guys who, especially if they've had a pretty steady camp and then they go ahead and have a good preseason, there's a possibility that they could make this roster. So those are the guys, when you look at the whole of the roster, we need everyone to contribute, right? So if it ends up being Benton Whitley or Elijah Chapman, who seemingly came out of left field and is making plays, this is what this team needs. In every single position, we need playmakers. So overall, I would say pretty good day for the defense. Trey Herndon ended up getting an interception. Isaiah McKenzie had 1 kick return for 26 yards. Punt returns, Gunner had 3 of them for 15 yards. The longest was 8. Isaiah McKenzie had 2 for 13 yards. Longest was 13. And Ayer Asante had 1 for 4 yards, and the longest was 4 yards. Last thing here, kicking game, Graham Gano had 1 extra point where he made it, and then Judd McAdamney, who I believe is number 99. I think that he's also Scottish. Like Jamie Gillen, also made an extra point. So both of them went 1 for 1. Good news. And Jamie Gillen had 7 punts for 319 yards, averaging 45.6 yards per punt. 1 touchback and 4 inside the 20. Now, with all of the new special teams rules, I was a little worried about Jamie Gillen, because the guy can boom it. And he's very inconsistent. So sometimes he nails it, and sometimes you're like, bro, what are you doing? So the fact that he had 4 kicks inside the 20 is great with these new kickoff rules. So let's see if he can, in preseason games 2 and 3, continue to be consistent when it comes to that aspect. So overall, great day for the Giants. They beat the Lions 14-3. They showed up really well during the Giants-Lions joint practices, which is not something that we've seen from them in the past. So overall, I think this team got a lot more tough, a lot more aggressive. They are fighting for their lives out there, which is what I want to see. I don't want to see anyone being lazy. And I think that, a lot of the players on this team have a real chip on their shoulder. Daniel Jones being one of them. He's rocking the beard. He's saying, F you to the haters. Let's go. It's my year. And I like that for him. Bobby Okereke recently spoke with Ari Marov and was saying, everyone keeps counting us out. Good. Let them do it, and we'll show them. I think a lot of guys are feeling like that. They're in the bottom of the polls. They get no respect across the board on anything. They're projected to win, 4.5 games? Like, that's the over-under. So let people keep respecting them. I think this Giants team is going to surprise a lot of people. And for all of the fans who are like, they're going to regress and they're going to go 5-13 and blah, 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 or 5-12 and 4-13, let me tell you something. This team that sucked last year, not a single thing went right for them, ended up winning 6 games. So why don't you have a little bit of faith that with more talent on the roster, with Daboll calling plays, with better veterans at the offensive line, and Brian Burns on this defense, and Kayvon, like, there's so many different reasons why I think we should be optimistic about this season, and I think we should all feel like they should win at least games if they're healthy. That is the only caveat. If they are not healthy, fine, I'll lose faith in them winning a lot of games. But I just feel like if they are healthy, there is no excuse. I don't want to hear the excuse that our secondary is young. I don't care that we have a new defensive coordinator. Does it mean that they have kinks to work out and these guys are going to make mistakes and they're not going to be perfect? Absolutely. However, you've got 17 weeks of the season to figure it out. You've had all off season in your meetings to figure out the communication and things like that. Last year, one of the reasons why the offensive line was so bad and the communication was so bad is because of the communication, whether it was the coaching staff or the players, a little bit of both, a lot of miscommunications. Now, we have seen some miscommunications with the defense. I expect that to be figured out in the next couple weeks. And like I said, I don't think this defense is going to be perfect week 1. I don't think they're going to be perfect at all this year, but I do have the expectation that they should be a hell of a lot better than last year, and that by week 4, 5, 6, 7, the miscommunications need to be zipped, done, no more of that. Because at that point, there's no excuse. You are professionals. You get paid an ass load of money to fucking talk to each other. Figure it out. So that's my expectation for them. Let's talk about the Texans game, because these are some guys that I think everyone should be focused on outside of the usual suspects. Obviously, the offensive line, which let's talk about JMS for a second, who missed a lot of time with his shoulder injury. The good news is that he is back in practices and he is getting team reps, which he has not gotten throughout the entire training camp. So he's back. I think we're going to see a little bit of him on Saturday. Don't really think we're going to see a lot. I think we're going to see way more of Greg Van Roten at center, Aaron Stinney at left guard, and then right guard. It's a good question. I don't know who's going to be at right guard. Let me look at the roster for a second and see if I can figure that out, because I mean, could it be Schlotman? Maybe they're going to have Schlotman more at center and Van Roten at right guard. That could be a possibility. But it's going to be interesting. What I do think is we're still going to see that rotation at the offensive line until John Michael Schmitz is healthy, which is frustrating because I have been saying that all I want is continuity on the line. We signed our guards, we brought in those vets. Like, now is the time to get those 5 guys to play together every snap, and it's just really unfortunate that JMS has not been doing it because he's just been injured. So it's unfortunate. It is what it is. Okay, back to guys to look out for on Saturday. So again, the offensive line, I know everyone's focused on that all the time, so I know that's going to be a big focus for a lot of us. The wide receivers, of course, getting to see Malik Neighbors and Jones in action is going to be great. Let's see if they hold up well. Even without Neighbors, when he was out this week, Jones did a really good job of spreading the ball around to Slayton, Hyatt, and Robinson, so expect to see a bit of that on Saturday. I also expect to see Theo Johnson take on a big role. Now, Daniel Bellinger is going to be utilized a lot. I think he's going to be used more of the blocking, and Theo Johnson is going to be used more as a receiver. That's what we have seen so far in camp. I expect that to continue. Someone else to keep your eyes peeled on is Chris Manhertz, because Daboll has spoken very highly of him as a tight end, and he's a really good blocker. He's been used a little bit in the passing game, but not as much. So I am very curious to see if he makes this roster. I think he's got a really good chance, but it all depends on how many tight ends they keep. With Lawrence Cager being out with a groin injury, Daboll said he's going to be out for a bit. I think he could end up starting on PUP, and then you could see a guy like Chris Manhertz make the team in his place, and then when Cager comes back, see a little switch there. Going to be very interesting. The running back, Turbo Miller, Dante, is my guy. Excited to see more of him. I think the running backs as a whole are going to be a really exciting group to watch. I hope that at this point, all of the people who are so nervous and worried about what our offense was going to be without Saquon are feeling better. If you guys have been here for a while, you know I have not been concerned that Saquon is gone. I actually think that it's the best thing for the Giants for a lot of reasons, but I think the biggest reason now is that you have so much speed at wide receiver between Neighbors, Hyatt, Wandale, and Slayton. Okay, you've got those four guys who are fast as hell. On top of that, you have four backs right now who are all very capable and very good backs. And not only that, Singletary, Tyrone Tracy, and Eric Gray can all be used in the receiving game, which has not been the case for the Giants in a very long time. So I think it's overall a very good thing, and I hope that you guys are excited about it too. Okay, from the offensive perspective, I think that's it. Let's talk about the defense. Like I said, Elijah Chapman is your guy. Keep your eyes focused on him. Listen, I know everyone's going to be excited to see Burns and Kayvon. How could you not be? Dexter? Nothing not to be excited about with those guys. Outside of that, Drew Phillips, of course, as a rookie, is going to be a guy to keep your eyes focused on. He's going to get some good slot corner reps. I'm also really curious about someone like Isaiah Simmons, who has been practicing with the corners. He's getting some slot reps. He's also, rushing the passer. So he's a guy that I'm really excited about this season as a whole, because I feel like every snap we're going to be like, where's Simmons? What's he doing? Like, he's going to be all over the map, and I think that's going to be really fun to watch from a fan perspective. So really curious about that. And then, Tyler Nubin, who is a guy that the Giants were really high on. They drafted this year. He was dealing with some calf stuff. We haven't seen a lot of him. So I am really curious to see on Saturday how much we see of him and what his snaps are like. Are they quality snaps? Does he make plays? Is he good at communication? These are all of the things that I want to see him do on the field, because up until now, we haven't really seen it. So again, a guy like Tay Banks, I know everyone's excited about. Cordell Flott, I'm not so sure is going to play. He's dealing with some sort of leg injury. I want to say a calf or a quad. I think it's a quad. So he's been, out of the mix for a little bit. So we're going to see a lot of rotations there at corner, and it's going to be interesting. Nick McLeod, another guy to keep your eyes peeled on. He had a great camp. Did pretty good. Did he play? He actually didn't play week 1 because of some sort of injury. So I think we're going to see more of him this week. So the biggest thing I want to see out of preseason is that no one gets injured. That's really the most important thing. Second to that is seeing all of these players improve. So I am very excited about it. I think, it's the right thing to play starters. I know injuries are a concern, but we have to learn from last year, okay? Every year is different, and every year they're going to learn things. And last year, we thought this offense was going to be great because we saw them play exactly one whole drive. That went well. And we all know how that turned out. So I am happy that we're seeing more of them. I don't want to see them the whole game. I don't need to see them a whole half. I would like to see them half a quarter to a full quarter. I want to see them get multiple series under their belt, see them be consistent, iron out whatever mistakes they have, and I want them to come out of the game feeling confident, and I want us as fans to also feel confident based on what we've seen thus far. So I think that's what to expect this Saturday versus the Texans. It's a 1 p.m. game. It should be on national television, and I will be back on Sunday with a recap. In the meantime, make sure you're following me on Instagram at New York Giants Fangirl. I'm going live this week. I might even have a couple special guests. So a lot of exciting things coming. The season is here. So happy. It's the 100th season of the Giants. There's a lot of really amazing things coming up for this team to celebrate the season. So I hope that everyone's starting to get excited. So make sure you follow along because we got some good stuff coming. So again, subscribe here so you get all of the notifications, all the new episodes as they come. And again, make sure you follow me on all the social platforms at New York Giants Fangirl. Thank you guys so much for listening, and I'll be back soon.